Elara had always been drawn to the eccentric, and the old Blackwood Manor was the epitome of it. Nestled deep within a neglected forest on the outskirts of town, its gabled roof and boarded-up windows held a somber elegance that most people found unnerving. But to Elara, an artist with a flair for the macabre, it was a masterpiece waiting to be restored. She bought the place for a song, much to the dismay of the locals who whispered stories of its tragic past. A family that vanished overnight, a series of mysterious deaths, and the ever-present chill that hung in the air around the property. Ignoring their warnings as mere superstition, Elara moved in on a crisp autumn afternoon. The air inside the house was thick with the scent of dust and decay, a stark contrast to the brilliant sunlight filtering through the cracks in the boards. As she began to unpack, a strange sensation washed over her. It wasn't cold, but a profound, heavy silence that seemed to swallow all sound, even her own footsteps. It was the kind of silence that made you feel as though you weren't alone, but that something unseen was watching, waiting. Elara shivered, not from cold, but from an unfamiliar unease. She brushed it off as the first day jitters in a new old house. But a tiny, insidious seed of doubt had been planted. Elara spent the next few days lost in the work of clearing the house. She peeled away layers of brittle wallpaper, scrubbed floors until the wood grain showed, and pried open every window, allowing fresh air to rush in and chase away the musty smell. The unsettling silence from the first day was gone, replaced by the comforting sounds of her tools and the rustle of leaves outside. She felt a growing affection for the old place, a sense of partnership in bringing it back to life. But then the odd things began. It started with a whisper, faint at first, a sound so subtle she thought it was the wind sighing through the gaps in the window frames. Then it grew clearer, a sibilant, dry rustle like old parchment being disturbed. She would pause her work, holding her breath, but the sound would stop as soon as she did. It was a fleeting, teasing sound, always just at the edge of her hearing. She told herself it was just the house settling, the old wood groaning under the weight of time. One evening, as she was sketching in the main parlor, she heard it again. This time, it wasn't a rustle, but a low, melancholic hum, as if a tune were being sung from a great distance. It seemed to come from the hallway, so she stood up and walked toward the sound. The hum faded as she approached, replaced by a sudden bone-chilling cold that radiated from the old grand staircase. It felt like walking into a freezer, a stark contrast to the cozy warmth of the rest of the room. Shivering, she reached out and touched the banister. It was icy to the touch, and for a fleeting moment she felt a vibration, a faint tremor that pulsed through the wood and into her hand. It was the house, she realized with a jolt, not groaning, but breathing.
The hum and the cold were unsettling, but Elara's rational mind fought back, attributing the oddities to old pipes and drafts. She continued her work, but now with a heightened awareness, her senses on a constant low-level alert. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, she stumbled upon a large canvas-covered object propped against a wall. Curiosity winning over her apprehension, she pulled away the dusty sheet. It was a portrait of a young girl, no older than 10. Her face was pale and solemn, her eyes large and dark, holding a profound sadness that seemed to look right through Elara. She was holding a worn-out doll, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. A nameplate at the bottom was barely legible, but with a quick wipe she could make out the name Lillian, Blackwood. A cold shiver ran down Elara's spine. It was the same name the locals had whispered about, the little girl who had vanished from the manor all those decades ago. Later that night, Elara was awakened by a sound that made her heart pound in her chest. It was a faint, childlike humming, the same melancholic tune she had heard before, but this time it was clearer, closer. It seemed to be coming from the hallway, right outside her bedroom door. The humming was followed by a soft, repetitive creak, like the rhythmic rocking of a small chair. A wave of ice-cold air seeped under her door, and a sickly sweet scent of decay, like wilted flowers, filled the room. Elara lay motionless in her bed, her breath hitched in her throat, paralyzed by a terror she had never known. The humming grew louder, a haunting lullaby that was both beautiful and utterly terrifying. Then it stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was even deafening than the sound itself. The lullaby was the turning point. Elara's rational defenses began to crumble, replaced by a raw, primal fear. The house was not just old, it was alive, and it was not happy. The whispering became more frequent and distinct, not just a rustle of paper, but fragmented words, so fleeting and distorted she couldn't make them out. The cold spots multiplied, patches of bone-deep chill that would appear randomly in different rooms, lingering for a few minutes before dissipating. One afternoon, while she was painting a landscape in the living room, her easel toppled over with a crash. There was no wind, No earthquake, it simply fell. She stood up, her heart pounding, and for the first time she truly saw the dust motes dancing in the sunlight, as if being stirred by an unseen hand. The very air around her felt heavy, charged with an invisible energy. That night, she heard a new sound, the distinct rhythmic thud of a ball bouncing against a wall in the main hallway. It was slow and deliberate, a lonely, childish game. She gripped her blanket tight, her mind racing. It was the same hallway where the icy cold had radiated from the stairs, the same one where the humming had come from. The sound continued for what felt like an eternity, a slow, methodical thud, thud, thud that echoed through the silent house. It was so simple, so mundane, yet utterly terrifying. It was a clear, unmistakable sign that whatever was in the house was no longer hiding. It was playing, and it was inviting her to play with it too. Fear had begun to dictate Elara's life. She found herself checking locks twice, jumping at every creak, and sleeping with the lights on. The house was no longer a project. It was a prison. The childlike presence, however, was not the only one. A new, more menacing energy had begun to manifest. It was a cold, malevolent force that seemed to hate her. She would hear heavy, dragging footsteps from the upper floors when no one was there. The temperature in the hallways would drop so drastically that she could see her own breath. One night, the rhythmic bouncing of the ball was replaced by a different sound, a slow, deliberate tapping, like someone knocking on a door. It was coming from the attic. She clutched her blanket tighter, her body rigid with terror. She had sealed the attic after finding Lillian's portrait, telling herself she wouldn't go back up there alone. But the tapping continued, relentless and slow, a constant, methodical beat against the stillness of the night. It wasn't the sound of a child playing. It was the sound of something trying to get out. Panic set in. She had to know. Swallowing her fear, she tiptoed out of her bedroom, her heart hammering against her ribs. The air in the hallway was so cold it felt like a solid weight. The tapping was louder now, a desperate, insistent rhythm. She reached the attic door, the one she had sealed shut just a few days ago. The tapping came from within, and as she pressed her ear to the cold wood, she heard a new sound, a faint, raspy whisper. This time, the words were clear. "Let me out." The voice from the attic, raspy and bone-chillingly clear, broke Elara. She scrambled back to her room, slamming the door shut and barricading it with an old dresser. The gentle, childlike presence of Lillian was being overshadowed by a new, more sinister one. The house was not just haunted, it was a battleground. For the next few days, the knocking on the attic door was a constant, maddening drumbeat. It would start at sundown and continue until the first rays of dawn, a persistent, slow rhythm that seemed to be counting down to something. Elara, unable to sleep or eat, spent her nights huddled in her bed, her mind a whirlwind of fear and exhaustion. One evening, desperate for a distraction, she decided to clean the large, ornate mirror in the hallway, a massive, antique piece that had been covered in grime. As she wiped away the dust and age, she began to see her reflection. But as the glass cleared, she saw something else too. Behind her reflection, just for a fleeting moment, stood a tall, gaunt figure. He was dressed in a dark, old-fashioned suit, his face a hollow blur. He didn't move or speak, just stood there, a silent specter in the depths of the glass. Elara's heart seized in her chest. She whipped around, but the hallway behind her was empty, shrouded in the deepening twilight. She turned back to the mirror, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The man was gone, replaced by her own terrified reflection. A moment later, however, a new image appeared in the mirror, not behind her, but within the glass itself. It was the face of the man, no longer a blur, but a sharp, clear image. His eyes were not hollow, but blazing with a cold, terrifying fury. He wasn't just in the house, he was trapped inside it, and he was staring directly at her. His lips began to move, forming a single silent word. Mine. The silent word from the mirror, a possessive, chilling declaration, sent Elara into a spiral of panic. She backed away from the mirror, her mind reeling. The man, the tapping, the whispers, it was all connected. This malevolent presence was not just haunting the house, it was trapped within it, and it wanted something. And it had found a way to communicate with her. She remembered the local lore, the whispers of a family that had vanished, a father, a mother, and a young daughter named Lillian. The man in the mirror was the father, the master of the house. He was the one responsible for the cold, the hatred, and the chilling silence. He wasn't a ghost. He was a psychic imprint of pure malevolence, tethered to the house itself. The thought of Lillian's gentle, childlike spirit
being trapped with this entity filled her with a desperate need to help. Driven by a mix of terror and compassion, Elara returned to the attic door. The knocking had stopped. The silence that now hung in the air was heavier, more ominous than before. She cautiously unlatched the door, her hand trembling. The attic was dark, and a thick, unnatural cold seeped out. As she stepped inside, her flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a horrifying scene. In the center of the room, surrounded by dusty, forgotten objects, stood an old rocking chair. It was swaying back and forth slowly, its rhythm a morbid echo of the rocking sound she had heard. On the floor beside it lay the worn-out doll from Lillian's portrait, its head completely severed from its body. But it was the walls that made her heart stop. Scrawled across the peeling wallpaper, over and over again, in a crude, childlike hand, were the same words she had heard whispered from within the house, the words that she had been unable to make out before. This time they were clear, a desperate plea written in the dust of time. Help me. Elara stumbled out of the attic, her mind reeling from the sight. Lillian's cry for help, scrawled on the walls, was a desperate plea for liberation from the malevolent father, the man in the mirror. He was the one who had trapped her, who had turned the house into a prison of unending sorrow. The rocking chair, the doll, the childish games, it was all Lillian's spirit trying to communicate with her, to warn her. But the man, the owner of the house, was fighting back, twisting the energy of the manor to instill fear and control. Driven by a surge of frantic adrenaline and a profound sense of purpose, Elara sprinted through the hallway. She had to leave, not to escape, but to break the curse, to free Lillian. She reached the front door, her hand fumbling with the lock, but it was no use. The door was sealed shut, the handle refusing to budge. A low, guttural laugh echoed through the house, reverberating from every wall. The temperature plummeted, and a frigid, icy wind swept through the hallway, even though all the windows were closed. Elara turned, her eyes wide with terror. The massive, grand mirror at the end of the hall began to fog over, and a dark shape formed within its depths. It was the man from her earlier vision, his hollow eyes now burning with a vengeful, all-consuming rage. His form solidified, and he stepped out of the mirror, a spectral figure of pure shadow and cold malice. "You can't leave," he rasped, his voice a dry, echoing sound like grinding bones. "This house is mine. She is mine. And now you are mine too." He raised a spectral hand, and the front door slammed shut with a thunderous finality. The windows on every floor of the manor shattered, not from a blow, but from an unseen pressure,
a silent explosion of glass. The wind howled through the new openings, a chorus of despair and rage. Elara was trapped, just like Lillian, a new captive in the prison of Blackwood Manor. The man's ghostly form advanced, his shadow stretching across the floor, consuming the light. As he came closer, his eyes were the last thing she saw, two burning embers of pure hatred. The last whisper she heard, carried on the frigid wind that had now taken over the house, was a childlike voice, soft and mournful, a final chilling lament. "Now you'll stay with us."